So just in terms of whether you look at the gut as being a place from which the majority of the nutrition that our body gets absorbed into the bloodstream, or we look at it as the home of our second brain because of the vagus nerve and how we have such a wide neural network even within our guts, or we look at it from the perspective of the microbiome, which apparently the weight of the microbiome is equal to the weight of the human brain. So that's how powerful it is in driving our overall state of health and well-being. So really, you can't separate the two. It's almost like one is a mirror image of the other. I find a useful way to approach working with individuals who are trying to approach their mental health more holistically, because it might just be a little easier to suggest to someone that we introduce more cruciferous vegetables into their diet rather than suggesting that, you know what, you need to change your mindset. That's so much harder.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney and Jenkins. Hello and welcome to the 74th episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This week I have with me Rochna Poddar. She is based in India and an integrative health and wellness coach. She founded her practice on the understanding there is a need for a holistic perspective on our health. After struggling with health issues at the age of 16 that remained undiagnosed for her, she began exploring different ways of nurturing mind and body through ancient practices like Pranic healing and Tibetan Buddhism, programs like Art of Living, Vipassana Meditation, and lifestyle changes with yoga and plant-based nutrition. As an adult, when she was diagnosed with insulin-resistance and PCOD, she was now armed with the knowledge to heal herself using a variety of different methods. She carries this wisdom forward and works with a variety of clients, guiding them towards feeling better on the inside and more confident on the outside. She is an integrative health and wellness coach and mind-body medicine practitioner certified by Saybrook University in California, and I had the pleasure of being in the training process with Rochna for the integrative wellness coaching at Saybrook, which is an evidence-based graduate program to help people find more balance and harmony in their lives. She is also a plant-based nutritionist and certified from Food Matters Institute in Australia. And so I'm really excited to introduce Rochna to you. She is warm and gentle. Her presence is very nurturing, and yet she has this lovely sense of humor that creeps out sometimes. So without further explanation from me, here is my conversation with Rochna.
Let's do that. Would you like to lead a small centering session, or how do we do this?
We'll center ourselves and with the intention that we'll share wisdom to whoever might need to hear it and perhaps allow you to remember who you are in the process too.
Perfect.
Okay.
I'm here.
All right. One of the first questions that I like to ask my guests on the podcast is, because you are a coach and you lead people to their wellness, there are a lot of things that you had to go through in your own life to be able to even do that. So when is the first time that you can remember that you realized that you had like an intuition or an inner voice of your own and you were able to follow it? Do you have a memory of that?
It's an interesting question, and I have to say it's not something I've actually contemplated. But when you ask me that, I kind of realize that it's something that's been with me since a very, very early age. And I remember even as young as, say, 5 or 7 years old, because, um, I have visuals or memories of my childhood with my family, with my sisters. And there was always a sense of being a little different from everyone else, not necessarily in a way that makes you feel like an outsider. There's still a sense of belonging that you get with with being with what's familiar. But yet there was this sense that I'm not able to connect to the path that everyone else is taking. So, you know, simple things like the kind of books I would read, I remember being in class 6 when I picked up my first book on Buddhist psychotherapy. Looking back, I realized it's completely insane. And obviously, I didn't understand anything, but there was this sense that there's something here that will help me deal with a sense of inner conflict. I think intuition showed up in the form of inner conflict for me very early in life. I remember being in like class 6 or class 5, and one day just looking at myself in the mirror and really like staring into my eyes in the mirror, being like, who is this person who's staring back at me? And right now, when I say it, I think it sounds completely insane. Like if my niece, who's 10 years old, said that to me, I would probably be a little frightened for her. But at that point, it felt completely normal to me. And I also realized at that point that it's a bit of a lonely journey because
Mhm.
there was no one else I could share that with.
Yeah.
None of my friends were even considering any of these things. And when I would try to share this with them, they would literally look at me like I was a nut job, which I maybe might have been, I don't know. But yeah, the sense that there is something more to just schoolwork and hanging out and going on vacation, it just felt very unfulfilling right from the get-go. I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Were you brought like was the culture very strict, or did it allow for ideas to come like that? Did you feel like a fight against like your inner self versus what was expected of you?
I think I started to articulate it that way a little later in life. When I was as young as 10 years old, this notion that you're fighting with the outside world um, didn't really come into my frame of reference simply because my tendency at least was to assume there's something wrong with me rather
Mm.
than thinking that the environment is not allowing for certain things. But from a more objective lens, looking back now, it may not have been very oppressive, but it was a very conservative, society and community. And in own ways, it continues to be so. And, the rules for boys versus girls were very clearly defined and delineated. So what you could do as a woman or even as a young girl was so different from what, like, for example, my male cousins were allowed to do. And so just this sense that there must be something wrong with me because I want to do something in a different way, or I'm having thoughts which are obviously not okay to be had, led to many, many years of just feeling like I was not okay. There's something wrong with me. And that took many years of exposure, understanding. And I think just exposure is the key word there, because then when I left home and I moved to different cities, to different countries, met with people from different cultures, you kind of realize that while we all come into life with different shades and different cultures, at the heart of it we're all really just the same. So that kind of helped me take the pressure off of myself.
Mhm.
And then began the battle, or the reconnaissance of my internal world and my external world. And I can't say that it's been a smooth journey and that everything has just turned out so peachy keen. There's still a lot of struggle on a daily basis with finding that balance, knowing when to prioritize yourself over others, but also at the same time knowing when it's important to let go, because the collective also matters. And, it matters to keep those relationships alive. So that balance is tricky even today.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've come to believe that it's not incidental that we're handed the challenges that we are, because those challenges kind of define who we are. And that's what weathers our spirit. That's what kind of nudges you along the journey that you're meant to unravel certain aspects of yourself. That makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. Were you connected to spirituality in any way when you were growing up? Or when did you meet that with your intuition?
It's an interesting question again, because when I reflect back, I realize that that was a journey I had started exploring very early in life. without really calling it that. I don't know, and I didn't have this vocabulary, right? I didn't have a vocabulary to describe that it was a spiritual quest or a seeker's quest. Like I mentioned, I started reading books about Buddhism when I was in class 6. I did my first Art of Living course with Sri Ravi Shankar's, I don't know if you're familiar with that system, but I did that first course when I was in class 8. I started learning pranic healing when I was in class 10. And, I studied Tibetan Buddhism. I learned pranic healing from the founder of pranic healing when he had visited Chennai. Learned Tibetan Buddhism, did a 5-day course with the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala in India. So I've kind of been like jumping from one thing to another, looking for something. I don't know what that something was, but I have noticed that I truly believe in the saying that when the disciple is ready, the master appears,
Yeah.
and the master isn't always in human form. It can be in the form of a teaching, it can be in the form of a book, it can be in the form of something you watch. But every time I would feel like I'm getting stuck and this is not fulfilling, something would come into my plane of consciousness for whatever level I was at or am at, and give me a sense that, okay, this is where you need to go next. So yeah, it's kind of been, I would say, like it's a journey at two levels. One level of it is the tangible side of it, and the other is the intangible. The tangible is the actual um, tool or practice that I might have found myself veering towards, whether it was art of living, pranic healing, Tibetan Buddhism, Vipassana, transcendental meditation. My God, when I reflect back, I feel like I've really hopped around quite a bit. But
Mhm.
having said that, I think the intangible aspect of it, or the underlying thread of wanting to explore beyond material existence, has been that driving force moving me forward.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah, in some ways, I feel as lost today as I did when I was a kid. But in another way, I think I've just become so much more comfortable with feeling lost.
yeah, absolutely. And to study all of those things, those very different
Yeah.
modalities, were you able to integrate those fully before moving on to the other one?
Mm, yes and no. I feel that if I had integrated even one of them fully, I would not have needed to move on to something else. And if full integration means that I become a Buddha? Did I become enlightened? Hell no. Very far away from that. But having said that, I think there's aspects from each and every one of them that have stayed with me in some capacity or the other. It's almost as if it was like taking one step forward each time. And with every step that you take forward, there's something that you're leaving behind, but there's something that's also getting carried forward with you. So in that sense, it's all in like a part of my being in some way. And what I find very interesting is that at different points in life, in different circumstances, even today, my mind would naturally gravitate towards one of these practices that I've picked up along the way, with this sense that that's what's right for me in that moment, or that's what's needed in that moment. And in fact, that also translates to part of my work now as an integrative health coach, because what I'm finding so much is that so many of us are lost for want of knowing what to put at the center of our lives, for
Mm.
want of a purpose, right? And just like I think a part of me is still on that journey of figuring it out, but maybe I've come some distance through all these different modalities, as you said. These are different like different things appeal to different people. So it's a very useful way of being able to reflect in the moment and see what might be most relevant to the individual I'm talking to or working with in that moment. So in that sense, although I wouldn't say that I've managed to absorb 100% of everything, I've there's a point of like surrender where it's like, okay, whatever's meant to serve me and meant to be uh, a part of my life will find its way. Who am I to question it, really?
Yeah, it's a good toolbox for you to have, for you to be able to apply it to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And things keep getting added and some of it keeps falling out. Or maybe the toolbox just keeps expanding to make room for more and more. But there is order and chaos, so at least so I want to believe.
Yeah. So when when did you start relating like the mind body connection? Like when did that become of an interest to you?
I think I had a theoretical interest in it from an early age. The first most palpable experience I had of it was during my first Vipassana retreat. Vipassana, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's a form of meditation that is taught by the Vipassana Institute. The word Vipassana, if I'm not mistaken, means literally to be aware of. And it is believed that Vipassana was a form of meditation practiced by Siddhartha Gautama in order to become the Buddha, in order to gain enlightenment. And this is a system that's taught worldwide today in the exact same format, wherein you have to go to a retreat center for 10 days. And in these 10 days, you are in complete silence. You don't speak to anybody else, but you also kind of just stay completely within yourself. And so you're not like talking to people through sign language or saying that, okay, I can't speak to you, but I'm going to write little notes to you. No, none of that. The intention is just to completely stay with yourself.
Yeah.
And oh my God, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. Having to stay with the crazy stuff that goes on in here for 10 days without, you're not even allowed to write, right? There's no journaling allowed, no reading allowed, absolutely nothing. It sounds like a recipe for disaster. And in some ways it was. But you also just come out the other side, seeing yourself in a completely new light. So I think to come back to the question you'd asked, I think in that particular, my first retreat of 10 days, I experienced my body in a way that I never had. I could feel the energy just flowing freely from somewhere above my head all the way to my toes. And it was absolutely an out of body experience, I would say. And but of course that lasts for a flash of a second. So I think I got my first I managed to like touch it for the first time there in terms of a real experience. Although I think theoretically I had been interested in it for a very long time. Theoretically, it intuitively made sense to me. And then I had a few other experiences which really brought the idea so palpably in front of me. And one of them was this technique called EFT, or emotional freedom technique. I don't know if it's something you're familiar with, but it's the tapping thing that's become quite popular these days as well. And I learned it and I started doing some of it. And I noticed that actually just through tapping, some of the aches and pains I had in my body, which were very physical, and in my mind, it was as real as it gets, would go from being on a scale of, on a scale of 1 to 10. If it was an 8 on 10, it would become like a 4 on 10 in a matter of minutes. So it became very real that this is not just a figment of my imagination. And of course, it's so much easier to own something when you've experienced it rather than understood it intellectually.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. To
And then
have
of
that.
course the course yeah, absolutely. Then it's like it's your knowledge. It's not somebody else's. It's not borrowed wisdom. It's your own. And it gives you more confidence to go a little further with it, explore more, see what else how you can play around with this new thing, this new toy that you've discovered almost. So I think that's when and I would say like where I am today, I don't have any doubt in my mind that the two are actually inextricably linked. And I've read a whole bunch of books about it. And the course we did at Saybrook, of course, Mind Body Medicine, that helped bring so many of those points home. And what I find really interesting is that now, we're not talking the language of Eastern esotericism anymore, right? It's not just esoteric. We have a scientific vocabulary to talk about this. If you think, I don't know if you're familiar with the book or the exhaustive body of work by Dr. Robert Sapolsky, if I'm not mistaken, that's his name. There's this book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And he, really talks about how stress manifests in the form of such specific diseases, and it's clearly documented what the pathways are, and how literally every single thought that you have in your mind, which we think of as an intangible, has a direct physical impact on your body, on your molecular structure. It's absolutely, it's a new paradigm that we're definitely not introduced to in the regular course of our lives. I don't know if that answers your question.
Definitely. Um, so in your studies at Saybrook, like what are you exploring specifically within that mind-body connection?
So I found, well, I'm kind of at the end of my journey with Saybrook at the moment. Um, I think there's two classes that I found. Well, there's all of them were very interesting, but the two that really, really stood out for me was number one, um, the human stress response, which is where I discovered the body of work by Dr. Robert Sapolsky, and where we learned about the vagus nerve and how that impacts every aspect of our bodies and minds, etc. And the second one, which I found really interesting, was the psychobiology of eating, because that's something that impacts all of us on an everyday basis. And I think all the topics covered in that course, each of us could relate to it. Stress eating, eating because you're happy, eating because you're sad, eating because of your friends around you are eating, or not eating because people around you are eating. There's shame associated with eating. If you think about it, words like guilt, indulgence, sin, we literally use it only in the context of food, right? Because there's so much emotion connected to what we're putting in our bodies, and the whole emotion, the plethora of emotions that go with it. So even recognizing that most of our eating behaviors don't stem from a need of nutritional deficiency or energy deficiency, but they stem mostly from emotional deficiency. What else is an everyday here and present demonstration that the mind impacts the body and vice versa?
Yeah. And then would you like to expand any on the gut-brain connection and how that works?
Wow. Yeah, that is such a fascinating topic, isn't it? And I'm by no means an expert, but it's just through my interest that I've done a fair bit of reading about it, and also had um, there's I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Nicola Pera. She wrote this book called How to Do the Work,
Mhm.
right? And she's, I think, a clinical psychologist with decades of experience behind her. And in a book, she made this point, which was quite a revelation to me. She said that through the duration of her practice, almost every patient that's come to her with a clinical diagnosis of depression, ADHD, anxiety, many chronic ailments, what we'd call as mental health issues, almost all of them had some gut related problem. It could be IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, or a whole host of them. But the connection that one manifested as the other uh, made it so obvious that there was certainly a connection between the two, and that's being demonstrated in the clinic as well. If we take that a step further and explore what we know today about the role of the microbiome, majority of which sits in our gut, we know that the state of your microbiome pretty much controls not just your physical health, but also your mental health. And there's a whole paradigm of necessity and sufficiency. So like, for example, if you're dealing with if we talk about integrative psychology, um, in order to treat a condition, it is necessary to first fix the gut microbiome and to fix your physical health and food habits. It may not be sufficient, but till we don't fix that, the foundation of what is necessary in order to have a healthy body and a healthy mind, we're never going to be able to cross that threshold and identify where sufficiency lies for a specific individual. So, just in terms of whether you look at the gut as being the place from which the majority of the nutrition that our body gets absorbed into the bloodstream, or we look at it as the home of our second brain because of the vagus nerve and how we have such a wide neural network even within our guts, or we look at it from the perspective of the microbiome, which apparently the weight of the microbiome is equal to the weight of the human brain. So that's how powerful it is in driving our overall state of health and well-being. So really, you can't separate the two. It's almost like one is a mirror image of the other.
Uh,
And I find it actually a very useful way, sorry, just to complete that thought, a useful way to approach working with individuals who are trying to approach their mental health more holistically, because it might just be a little easier to suggest to someone that we introduce more cruciferous vegetables into their diet rather than suggesting that, you know what, you need to change your mindset. That's so much harder. So that's like hanging fruit in my mind.
oh, wow, yeah. Have you explored these concepts with Ayurveda? Like, is that something that you've dabbled in?
Not so much. Um, I come from a culture which is steeped in Ayurveda, and
Mhm.
knowingly, consciously or subconsciously, I think there's parts of it that's always crept into my life from the time I've been a child, just
I-
because, we're a fairly we're a culture that's very open to non-Western medication. If anything, there is a tendency to approach Western medication or allopathy and tablets and the pharma industry with just a hint of suspicion, a healthy suspicion, I would say. And our first instinct as a culture, the minute somebody is unwell in the house, is to go to your kitchen, right? And we'd cook up herbal concoctions, ginger, turmeric, herbal teas, name it. Like that's pretty much our first go-to, right? So in that sense, some of these they borrow from tips and tricks from Ayurveda. But having said that, I exercise a lot of caution with just pulling out random ingredients from different systems. So Ayurveda is not just about the herbs, it is an entire system, right? And in order for a system to work, we have to respect it in its entirety. We have to treat with sanctity the different elements that go into it and not reduce it down just to merely taking some herbs or not. So, for example, there's ghee, for example, clarified butter, which is so big in India,
Mhm.
is a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners highly recommend introducing ghee into your diet. But the problem is that if you want to introduce ghee into your diet in a therapeutic capacity, doing just that is not going to get you across the finish line. You have to do it as a part of the whole system,
Mhm.
right? It's like if you're trying to make uh like say you're trying to make pasta and you look up a recipe and but you look up 10 different pasta recipes and say, hey, you know what, I like that ingredient, so I'm going to take that from there, this other ingredient from another place, and a third ingredient from a third recipe. You're going to end up with a total mishmash which tastes completely inedible, right? So that's kind of what it's like. So yeah, as a system, when followed in its entirety, Ayurveda is super powerful, but we must tread with caution and not mistake one slice of what we're seeing for the entire system. It's like seven blind men and the elephant. And my concern is a lot of us end up doing that with most systems. So in that sense, I haven't felt the need to have to do a deep dive into Ayurveda as a patient myself. I've found that just living in alignment with nature, sleep well, eat plant-based as far as possible, eat as close to nature, eat food that's alive and not dead, eat, sleep well, get enough movement, have healthy relationships in your life. Like that's actually sufficient in most cases, especially if you're looking at it from a preventative lens. And if you haven't pushed yourself to a brink of needing a more intensive intervention, if that makes, yeah,
Absolutely. I think
that's
that philosophy probably goes alongside of the integrative health coaching that you do as well.
absolutely, absolutely
Would you like
fully.
to explain that philosophy a little deeper as far as like the integrative health coaching that you are offering?
Sure, happy to. So I think the first bit I'd like to talk about is what the word integrative really means, right? It's not just integrating different schools of medicine or different schools of thought. It is about, as an individual, integrating all the different layers that we have, all different aspects of our being, which includes our physical being, our mental being, our emotional being, our spiritual being, and really understanding that they're not separate. Each of these is actually just a mirror of the other. And when you approach one with a great degree of sincerity and do a deep dive into it, somehow other things also fall into place. So we don't need to draw these artificial boundaries between this is what I'm doing for my mental health and this is what I'm doing for my physical health. It's absolutely not necessary. But whichever you pick as being the entry point, we must do it with full sincerity, right? So when I work with people, the first thing we do is we try and identify what that entry point looks like for them. What part of their lives do they feel that they are far away from being in their fullest potential, right? So if somebody is dealing with physical health issues, then interestingly enough, when you actually do a deep dive, two things come out. One is they probably never contemplated the reason they're in that position to begin with, because the medical system is not geared in a way to ask you to reflect on what do you think got you here in the first place, right? So that's one thing. And the second is, in almost all cases, people realize, they have a sense of what the cause might be. And most of the times, there's also a sense of awareness that it's not just about um, food choices or movement choices, that there is an emotional layer to it. There is a sense of what am I doing with my life? Where does my sense of purpose come from? Where does my sense of belonging come from? Right? So th that conversation itself allows for a certain amount of integration and thinking about the different aspects that contribute to feeling like you're living a full and healthy life. So when there is that understanding already, then the it's far more effective and fulfilling to then move the conversation in a direction saying, okay, so here's where we are at the moment. Where would you like to begin? Would you like to address this? The analogy I often use is different fingers pointing to the same moon, right? That moon is one. Your goal, your purpose, that notion of fulfillment, that notion of enlightenment, that's the moon. But you can have many different fingers from different places pointing to the same moon. The finger is just the tool. We mustn't confuse the finger for the moon. And at the same time, each person might have a different way of approaching the moon. So, what does that look like for you? Where would you like to begin? Would you like to begin by talking about nutrition? That's fine, because if we actually fix nutrition, when I say fix, I mean get it to a point where you feel like you're fully aligned with what's going inside your body, chances are other things also fall into place. Or if somebody is more inclined towards a spiritual approach, then what can you do to feel that you are spiritual, your spiritual practice is in full alignment with your larger life purpose? Does it mean that we explore some new meditation techniques? Does it mean that we perhaps go on a retreat so we get that time to connect at a deeper level with ourselves? Does it mean that we introduce small practices like chanting, even singing like Nada Yoga, anything that makes you feel like you're getting back to source for yourself? So in my eyes, that's what integration is. It's not about picking things from 10 places and then like plugging it together. It's about feeling completely centered and integrated at every level of an individual's own being. Does that, I don't know, does that make sense? Or are we getting into like serious woo-woo territory?
Absolutely. It's a very holistic perspective and lens of, and it also gives people a chance to maybe choose something that's not so full of resistance.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. And I think that's where the coaching paradigm is very powerful. We did that together. So we've learned the hard way that you can't really make suggestions to people and have them accept it.
Right.
No one like me told what to do, whether it's a 5-year-old kid or an 80-year-old, senior citizen. Autonomy is so central to the human experience. And just the sense that I have charge over my health and I can take decisions and I have the power to move towards a more fulfilled version of myself with all the answers within me. Just that in itself, honestly, I found that most of us go through life without realizing we have that power switch.
Yeah.
And that, the coaching space, that trusted space that forms between a coach and a client. I've seen this, like people literally have like a eureka moment where they're like, yeah, you're right. I actually do know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
I just
Just
haven't done it. There's a gap between knowledge and action or even awareness.
right.
That's such a powerful moment.
Hmm. Yeah, it's reminding people like who they are, right? In a way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's when it comes from within and when that awareness comes from their insight about themselves, that's the only way it's sustainable in the long term. It's like, do you remember that movie Inception?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so brilliant, right? Because what do? They put together that whole $1 billion song and dance to plant a thought in the protagonist's mind in a way where he actually believed it's his own thought. And
Hmm.
to do that, they have to go 3 layers deep down into his subconscious. And just that idea that I've been thinking about in a certain way, but actually I should think about it in a different way, then goes on to change the fate of the entire planet in some sense. So really, that's the power of autonomy and thinking.
Yeah. And I feel like by coaching others, like you're using your intuition to sort of guide them. And by doing so, I would think that you're learning about yourself in that moment as well.
Oh my God, absolutely. So much. Mostly I'm learning that I should just shut up. I'm learning that I'm learning to resist the temptation to offer advice.
Mhm.
I'm learning that I'm no different from anyone else, and nobody else is different from me. So if I don't like something, they don't like it either. And I'm also learning that I really don't know better than anybody else. Just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for someone else.
Right.
I think it teaches you so much humility,
Yeah.
teaches you to be real. And then also just that with every single new coaching experience, you have to start with a clean slate. You can't go into any conversation assuming you know anything at all. Begs the question, why would somebody pay you? But I think finally, we all want to feel like we're seen and we're heard. That's the fundamental human dilemma. We're all struggling because we feel invisible in some capacity, often in our own eyes. And to feel heard and to feel seen in a safe space, I think that's the greatest gift we can give someone.
Absolutely. Like that presence and not coming into it with all of
Yeah.
these like preconceived like concepts of what they need in the moment. Right.
And in a sense, that's what you're doing for me right now, right? By being genuinely interested in what I have to say, it helps me feel seen and helps me feel heard,
Yeah. Yay.
right? I'm really grateful to you for that, Whitney. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So if people would like to work with you and your
Mm,
coaching and figure out
mm.
like how they can like enjoy your wisdom, where could we guide them?
I have a website, so happy for them to take a look at that, or on social media, happy to share my number, whatever. I'm here, I'm available. I'm very keen to be of service in any capacity that I can. So phone, my website, LinkedIn, these are all great ways to get in touch. And I can drop you a little text with my website, so you can share that in the description of this conversation, if that's helpful.
For sure, yeah, I can add all of the links into the show notes too, so people can just click on it and whenever they're listening.
Yeah, that'll be great. Wonderful.
So
Nice.
is there anything else that we didn't go over that you feel like you would really love to share or talk about?
Mm. I mean, I think it's just, I'm fine. This is more my personal journey. Again, it's not to say that it's meant for everyone, but I'm finding more and more that simplicity is just so key. The minute something feels really complicated or complex, I think it's missing a beat somewhere. Or it's like we use complexity to confound truths,
Mm.
right? So whether it's in, I'll just go back to food as an example. The best tasting dishes typically have very, very few ingredients, right? If it's a dish that has a million different ingredients, it's probably because the base raw material, it doesn't taste great, or the quality of the fresh produce isn't great. So we're trying to camouflage something, right? With all these different spices, etc., etc., etc. With like exercise, I remember my yoga teacher used to say that if if you can do Tadasana, which is the simple posture of just standing straight in alignment, it's the simplest. Visually, it'll seem like it's the simplest thing, but he says that if you can do that right, you don't need to do anything else.
Mm.
We don't need to do all these crazy contortions and back bends and front bends and touch your nose to your toes and whatever else. You don't need to do any of that, right? The greatest power lies in simplicity. And it's been my effort to see how I can always be a little bit in awareness of what I'm doing and weed out whatever doesn't feel necessary. I'm trying to do that with my life. I've moved to a very, very simple life from the hustle and bustle of Mumbai to a little village in South India, which has maybe a few thousand people. Eliminating the need for a lot of possessions. And I'm not saying I live an ascetic life, don't get me wrong, absolutely not. I'm working harder than I've worked in my life, but I think you weed out all of that, it suddenly just makes room for clarity. And there's room to see what you should place at the center of your life. So, I limit my time on social media as well. I've set a little, alarm on my phone. So 15 minutes is where I max it out. But effectively, I think the learning that has been life changing for me is to eliminate whatever is not necessary, because it is really a distraction, taking us away from that which brings true joy and fulfillment in life. So, yeah, that's just the main thing, I guess. And even with health coaching, that's my approach. Keep it super straight and simple. The best solutions are often like very straightforward. Like, for example, I had this one client who was struggling with sleep issues for decades and decades and decades. And through the course of our conversation, we talked about different things, and I won't get into that. But at the end of it, we introduced one small um, new habit for him to try, which was taking a warm shower right before he went to bed. As simple as that. And that fixed it. It
Mhm.
literally fixed it because it helped him disconnect and literally and metaphorically wash away the stresses of the day. Take that warm shower, listening to music. So, at a physiological level, it helped his, um, you know, the his body calm down and get into a state of relaxation. And then he was able to get into bed without worrying about everything that had happened. And just that one simple act helped him fix a sleep routine, which he had struggled with for years. No medication, no devices, nothing like that. And I think that quest for simplicity is just so powerful. And it's something I hope to be able to walk closer towards as we move forward in life.
Yeah, I love that so much, and I agree with you 100%. I strive for simplicity as well. I used to not, but now I crave it. So like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So I have one last question that I usually ask to sort of wrap everything up. And that
Sure.
is, if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
Let's see. Take life seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. We often do the opposite.
Yeah.
I think it's important to treat life with a degree of sanctity and respect because we're here and there's something we're meant to do. It's not just incidental that we're here. I'm not saying that you have to believe in God. I don't know if I do, but we're here, for a defined finite amount of time. And I think it's for more than just to have a few laughs and have a few drinks and play a few games. That's great. Like all of that is important too. But I think it's important to maintain some degree of focus about what you want your life to be about.
Mhm.
And yet, in that journey, make work the focus and not yourself. Be of service to work, not to your idea of who you are, because that can be the biggest roadblock.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and your wisdom. And I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Whitney. It was really nice. I really enjoyed it as well. I'm so grateful to you for reaching out to me for us to have this little chat. And it's given me so much to think about as well and really helped me realign to and bring back into focus some of the things that we've talked about. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.